So glad that you've joined us again today for Wednesday in the Word. As you can tell, it's Joe and I with you again. He and I began some emphasis on our responses, our reactions to going back to church, reopening our services. And we identified 5 areas that we would be kind of some talking points that might help us all consider how we respond, how we react as we go back into our churches, gathering once again, getting some form of what we think might would look like normality in comparison to where we've been. So we, again, as I stated, we identified 5 areas. The first one was that we certainly need to pray, to that a reaction, and that's more a proactive response than it is a reactive response. That in reality we should be praying every day, should be communing with God on a moment by moment, day by day basis. Then we have a second talking point that moves us into not panicking, but to seek God for wisdom and guidance and direction. The third one that we plan to deal with is guarding our heart and our mind. The fourth one is that we must rely on the faithfulness of God. What He's promised, He will be faithful in keeping His promise. And then lastly, we were going to, or are going to, address looking for opportunities in which we can express the love of Christ that equips people for life. So those are the 5 areas that we will discuss, and today we'll spend our energies on not panicking, but using wisdom as we ask God for wisdom, and He will give it to us. So Joe, let's kind of shift our gears to that second discussion point today, and hopefully as we converse with one another, the things that we raise will be beneficial to those that are listening to us.
Okay. So as you pointed out, we're dealing with number 2 today, and these points are available. Some of you may have downloaded them. The scripture or the message notes, and this one deals with wisdom. And when we first started a couple weeks ago, talking about this, and you were laying out the kind of the path of what we were going to talk about. As you mentioned, we were talking really COVID, returning to church, and so forth, and now the situation that we're in, that's still a reality, but it almost feels like today, like COVID what? Yeah. We're wondering, so many other things have come in and have, taken our attention and our focus. And so when I first was thinking about this, I thought, how are we going to keep talking about this? And then I kind of, as we talked through it, I realized, well, don't panic, use wisdom is very applicable.
Sure.
Right now, regardless of what things that we're going through. And so when we talk about these things, we know that we're talking with people that we love, that we minister with. They minister to us, we minister to them, we work together, and we know that there's a lot of people that are hurting, and it's a difficult time. And of course, we see that things are that have happened in our world that are hurtful to our brothers and sisters.
Painful.
And really to all of us.
Yes.
But we're talking here, and we wanted to know kind of how do we apply God's wisdom. Not only are we going back to church from a worldwide pandemic, but we're also dealing with all the things going on in our nation and the attention on things that have happened that are terrible.
Right.
So
sinful.
Right.
In reality, it's what's going on around us is, and James talks about it, how it is sinful. Any kind of racism, discrimination, partiality, in any manner, James identifies it as sin, and we're walking through those kinds of things today.
Yes, and so I'm hoping that we can sort of talk, and you can share with us some things and some ways that we can deal with, respond to what we're faced with, but in godly wisdom and not in a form of panic. I want to just read a little bit from the notes that we had that you had put together, but one of the comments is, it's nearly impossible to be in a state of fear but still stay level-headed and make the right decisions. And we're talking here about, this was at the time dealing more with coronavirus, but with coronavirus on every platform, and many are around us acting like it's the end of everything, but it's not. But Christians can be a source of stability and strength, and all that can be attributed to our faith. So if maybe you can help me understand that, okay, so yeah, we've still got the COVID thing that we're dealing with, but we have these other things that we're talking about, sinful things that are impacting our world and our nation and our lives. Help me understand, how do we respond in godly wisdom? I know we've talked about prayer and all these other things apply, but we're dealing kind of with wisdom this week. Well, how do I do that? How do I respond in godly wisdom?
Yeah, I think that in moments that any of us are afraid, and we get panicky, we respond, we react in ways that are based on our fear, based on our panic. I do it. In fact, even this week, the security light goes off outside, and I'm thinking, who is around my house at 3 o'clock in the morning? Oh, yeah. So I'm waking up 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm reacting, I'm responding. What am I going to do? Who is out there? How am I going to handle this? What if somebody's there? All of these things. So we don't always think clearly when we get in a panic. And I think our original intent when this second talking point was written was that, wow, when we're in moments that we really don't understand, that we're confused, we're fearful, we need more than what we've gotten on our own to address these kinds of things. So instead of wringing our hands, I think God's given us through the Apostle James, who I believe is who I call the apostle of practical Christianity. How does Christianity flesh out in the world? So I think he gives us really, really good guidelines. In fact, if you join us in the book of James, you'll find in the very first chapter him saying, "Count it all joy when you enter into diverse temptations, knowing that the trying of your faith works patience, patience that you are entire, perfect, wanting nothing." Then he says, "If any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men." And I think, Joe, the King James Version uses upbraideth not, which in reality means he will not chide us for asking. Sometimes we ask questions and people think duh. Why are you asking such a dumb question?
Sure.
We really should know how to respond in times like this because we're Christian and because the seed of God is within us. And even in moments of anger, which I've ranged a myriad of emotions over the last few days. I've cried. I've been angry. I've been mad. I've been mad at others. I've been mad at myself. All a range of emotions. But in that emotional state, I have to, God, give me wisdom to respond righteously and to become a proactive individual in a solution and not allow my reaction to make things worse.
Okay.
Because sometimes I think if I'm panicky, I respond or react based on my panic, based on my fear, and I really, without intention, make things worse rather than better because I may not fully understand and I'm working with a limited knowledge. So it's I think important for us first to ask God for wisdom. God, I need wisdom to know what to do, how to do, and when to do. Because I think timing is certainly everything when we do address matters such as we're facing. So that was James in chapter 1, and then he talks about different kinds of wisdom that I think is really, really important. In fact, let me read it to you. He compares heavenly wisdom with demonic wisdom. Listen to what he says. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done, watch, in the meekness of wisdom. So that's to say that what I do ought to be done based on my understanding of others rather than trying to force them to understand me. See, meekness is not weakness, but meekness is power or authority under God's control. See, and I believe that's what James is talking about. And James was the half-brother of Jesus, and Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." So I think our approach in a spirit of meekness certainly is not an attitude or an illustration of weakness, but it is one that is powerful under God's control. So then he goes on, Joe, and he says, "But if you have bitter envy and you self-seeking in your hearts, don't boast and lie against the truth. This kind of wisdom," he said, "does not descend from above, but watch," he says, "it's of the earth, it's sensual," and he goes so far as to say it's even devilish. So if I do what I do in response to what's going on around me in any other manner than a spirit of wisdom with the meekness of Christ, I am, as he says, if I'm seeking, self-seeking, if I'm doing it with bitter envy, it's not coming from heaven. Verse 16 says, "For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there." That's pretty direct.
Yeah, it is.
Where there's envy and where one would seek for their own, he said, there's every other evil work present. Then he goes in verse 17, but the wisdom that is from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruit, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now he finishes this by saying, now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. That's pretty direct about how I, as a follower of Jesus, should not just give a good speech. You know, people want you to speak out. They want to hear what you think about a matter. But James says, if we're truly following heavenly wisdom, we'll do more than speak. We will act in a righteous manner. And he says that peace will be sown by those who make peace. So if all I'm doing is speaking to this matter and not stepping into the circumstance to develop relationships whereby I could understand what people feel, then I'm only acting out of what I know rather than coming to understand what they know.
Wow. So I know I think sometimes when we think of peace, I know sometimes I have thought of peace along the lines of, I guess, not causing trouble or not whatever you want to call it, because they're going to say, well, I'm a peaceful person, I do this, I don't do that. But you're saying that the words there says that I need to sow peace, which means it's more than just me controlling or being mindful of what I do. I and say, well, I didn't hurt this one or whatever, but I need to say, well, no, I have a greater responsibility to literally go out and sow and do things that will return peace. So maybe you can help me understand, like, some examples, like how do we go and sow peace? I mean, what do we do? And I understand we can meet with other people, you said, and get to know people that are, I guess, that aren't like us. That's good.
Absolutely.
What are some other things that I maybe could do to sow peace? I mean, it sounds proactive to me. So it's like, what do I need to do to go sow these seeds of peace, or sow peace?
When we talk about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, goodness, meekness, faith, temperance, those are fruit that's evidenced from the life of one who is driven, motivated by the Spirit, a follower of Jesus. Okay, those are virtues that flow from his life. But think about those terms: love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, meekness. They are relational terms.
Okay, yeah.
If you're going to know I love you, then I've got to do more than say, Joe, I love you. Okay. I need to interact with you in a manner that expresses to you or proves to you my love. See, it's kind of like what the Bible says about Jesus. No greater love a man has than he would lay down his life for his friend. So what was that doing? That Jesus wasn't just saying, for God so loved the world, okay? Right. But he went on and he said, but he gave his only begotten Son. So it wasn't just what was spoken, but it was the action of God the Father and the submission of God the Son that produced peace. Remember? Now, peace may not be the absence of conflict, but peace is a deep, settled assurance that God is in control of what's going on. I certainly don't understand all of what God is endeavoring to do, but I can understand what God's endeavoring to do in me, to cause me to be very cognizant of what others around me are feeling, the pain that they experience.
Sure.
And I hurt for their. I think about Joe. I think about this Mr. Floyd. I think about his family. What are they feeling right now? Every time they see this video on television, I can only imagine, having lost my family as I did shortly after coming to Florida, and just seeing pictures of them, but to see that kind of injustice on one that they loved, I can only imagine the pain. And as one, I'm praying for that family. And then I think about others, that incident produces fear in their lives.
Sure.
See, so I hurt for them. My heart is crying out, God, give me wisdom so I can sow peace in the midst of a volatile situation. And I saw it in a picture depicted in Miami, actually, where that police officers were on their knees in the middle of the road crying out to God. I heard today on NBC, Hoda, on the Today Show, I heard her as she played a clip of a white man on his knees and a black man standing, and the white man asking the black man for forgiveness, and then the black man on his knees before the white man asking for forgiveness. And Hoda's words, Joe, were, and I think she was talking to one of the police officers there in the Houston area, and her words were, sir, and I don't remember if it was the chief of police or the sheriff or someone, but she said, sir, could we actually be seeing before us the solution to this problem? And oh, Joe, that's what I'm talking about. And I believe that's what James is talking about when he says, now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. You see, we have a tendency, I believe, to want to say, brother, if I've done anything to hurt you, would you forgive me? Well, instead of saying, if, let's say, we know that there have been injustices, I'm sorry. Certainly, I may not have been one that perpetrated it, but as a leader in this church, as a leader in my community, I stand and I say, we're sorry for what's transpired, but we must move forward in a way that says, today we're going to be repairers of the breach. We're going to sow peace in the midst of battle. In the midst of a war zone, we're going to have a calming effect. So I think that's where God's called at least me. And I'm asking our regional bishops, our district bishops, help us to frame what we do in the state of Florida to reflect that kind of attitude and environment in this state. A multiplicity of cultures, a multiplicity of preferences. So how do we walk in the Spirit to the point where that all of those cultures are yielding to the kingdom culture. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That's my heart, Joe. That's what I want. That's what I want to see. But my heart is grieved, brother. My heart is grieved. I've cried. I've prayed, and I continue. And every morning, 4 minutes after 10, we're praying. Evening, 4 minutes after 10, we're praying. That says 10:4. We get it, God. We get what you're trying to tell us. You see, Joe, another thing that I believe God raises things to our awareness that's going on that maybe we're not fully aware of, but he raises them for a purpose for us to do just what James said, to step into the moment, but step into the moment to sow peace. So I think those are ways that we certainly can embrace God's wisdom, and it's a heavenly wisdom, not an earthly wisdom. You know,
Yes.
those are two ways, I believe, two expressions or comparison of the kind of wisdom that sometimes we walk in. We either walk in wisdom that comes from heaven, or wisdom that we get here in earth. You know?
Wow. Okay. Thank you. I'm thinking. I've heard you recently speak of building bridges. We need to build a bridge. I think sometimes I don't know, just in life, in conversations, it's easy to fall into a situation of kind of like, I want you to see my side, you know, and like, Joe, I want to convince you, or whatever that may be of, but when I think of the concept of building a bridge, I tend to see that in a different light. And I know we're talking about, okay, so, you know, getting to know and getting to work with another. Any other thoughts on that, or comments, I guess, on that thought that I've heard you express of building bridges?
I think many times the way in which we say what we do, and sometimes the words in which we use, are received in a completely different manner than what they were intended. And I'll give you an example. I heard someone not too long ago, when we were actually in the Bahamas visiting, Bryn and I, and there was a statement made, well, they're driving on the wrong side of the road. As if to say, here in America, we drive on the right side, they drive on the wrong side. Well, that person did not intend it to be, we're right, you're wrong.
Sure.
But it certainly could have been received by those who heard it as to say, you think you're right and I'm wrong. But that wasn't the heart. I knew that wasn't the heart because I know that person.
Sure.
Okay, so I think what we say first can be misunderstood, again, because we may not know that person well enough to know their character and judge them by their character rather than the words that they have spoken. Okay?
Yeah.
Secondly, I think the wise man of Proverbs said, a good understanding brings favor. So this building bridges is about me coming to you when I don't understand an action that may be a behavior that you're in.
Yeah.
Let me come to you, not pointing a finger and say what you're doing is wrong, but let me ask you, Joe, help me know why you feel the way you do that's driving what you're doing right now. Help me. I want to feel what you're feeling. I want to know, because when I know, and understand you rather than trying to make you understand me. I deepen my relationship with you, and and your relationship with me is deepened in the same manner. So the deeper our relationship goes, the more we know one another's hearts, and the more we're able to relate, connect, and together make an impact that has a greater influence than it would just me or just you on your own. See, so as I'm building that bridge, so I'm going to build that bridge by, first of all, not using words that could be, or trying my best not to use words that would be hurtful, but words that would be helpful, considering how they might be received. And secondly, when I say what I do, to be careful that I don't immediately cause people to build walls, rather than my intent is that walls come down so that there can be a deep relationship, not a superficial relationship, but a deep relationship, kind of like what we talked about, deep prayer. We all have connections, relationships,
True.
but we need deeper relationships that go to the core of us understanding where people are, so we can interact better with one another.
Man. Well, I know myself, I certainly want to receive God's wisdom in how to act, and I'm sure we all do. But this makes me kind of think, because it's sometimes I think it's easy to kind of trust in my earthly wisdom, and maybe things that, well, in my experience, this, and so I have leaned on that at times. But I like the idea that I need to be careful, because I make sure that, well, now is that God's wisdom, and am I making sure that I'm following that? Because there's times, if I look at you based on what I've experienced and know, I may not understand you, but I like what you said. But if I take the time to get to know and understand, then I can relate in a more deep way. And it sounds like that's what you're saying, is that even God wants us, Jesus wants us to do that with one another.
Absolutely.
So that's
absolutely,
that's a pretty beautiful thing, really, if we can, because God created us all.
right.
And he loved us enough to make us. And yes, we're different in sometimes lots of ways. But I also like that commonality and the way that I can learn to appreciate your place, where you are. In other words, when by place, I mean like what you do,
Sure.
where you're coming from, something that, I never grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard you talk about growing up in California.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a whole other coast from where I grew up.
Yeah,
And,
that's the left coast.
So, I think, oh, wow, that must have been cool, or that's, I don't know. There's things that as I meet different people, I realize that, hey, the town I grew up in, it was a great town. I thought I was from a big city.
Yeah.
Heather and I found out we really weren't. We didn't know that growing up. And so, as you meet other people, I have loved and have thoroughly enjoyed meeting different people. I lived in D.C. area. My wife and I did. We've obviously lived in Florida for a long time, and we've met a lot of different people that we didn't grow up around. But I'm just saying, I'm thankful that that God helps us, and that helps us to grow, all of us. So I want to make sure that I'm seeking God's wisdom, because it's tempting to panic.
Right.
If I'm looking around, it's tempting. But anyway, I appreciate you sharing that with me, and I hope that we can do that very thing, is walk in His wisdom.
Yeah. You raised something that I think is really important, that I was reminded of a class that I took in some master's level education about cultures. And one of the assignments was to watch this YouTube video, which actually was a TED talk
Okay.
from a woman. I believe she was from Kenya, I think. And she addressed the value of multiple influences in your life rather than just a single story. So, had I grown up in the Southeast and not had the experience of California, I would have had a single story, Southeast, but because I had the Western influence, California influence, it brought another story that in our church in Fresno, when we pastored, there were about 12 different nationalities represented in that one local congregation. When we went there, it was all white, but we were in a community that was unbelievably multicultural. In fact, in the school district alone, there was 100 different languages and dialects spoken. Can you imagine being an administrator in that kind of school?
That'd be tough.
Unreal. So our church was right in the middle of that. So we had to begin to understand a multiplicity of stories so that we could relate to those people and why they felt the way that they did. The Asian culture, the Hispanic culture, the Filipino culture, the African American culture. We all of those represented there a true melting pot, and we learned a lot. So I learned a ton there. We transitioned from California to Kentucky, and I went back into that southeastern feel where there was a lack of culture. And I honestly, going into churches, I saw white faces and blue eyes most of the time. So I was excited to come to Florida to get back into that diversity once again, and to now walk it out, flesh it out. A multiplicity of stories makes us the fabric of this church, the Church of God of Prophecy in Florida, a multicultural, multi-generational, subcultures within our cultures, and all of us flowing together. Wow, what an impact in the state of Florida, in the nation of North America, and what could be the world. See, so I believe God is helping us to see. That's why I'm saying, God, we get it. 10:4. We're listening. We get it. Help us to flesh out what you're trying to say using godly wisdom. Not just, as you stated, wisdom of my experience, because I've got 40 years of ministerial experience that I could rely on those 39 years of experience in order to meet this crisis in the moment when God wants to raise fresh heavenly wisdom in this moment that I did not get even in my 40 years of ministry. That's why he's saying, ask for wisdom, pray for wisdom, seek God for his guidance and direction. And he certainly will give it. Do you see anything else, Joe, that you think maybe we might need to cover today?
No, I think we've probably covered all we can in one session. Maybe, what are we going to talk about next week?
Well, I think if I'm understanding, if I remember, it's guarding our heart and our mind. We'll deal with that next week. So we hope that today's conversation has been helpful, encouraging, and enlightening somewhat as to what James would guide us in seeking wisdom from heaven and then fleshing it out by being one who would make peace, sowing peace into days filled with anxiety and angst, and in some cases even violence. So I say today, let us as the church arise, and let us in the face of sin rise with an expression of God's love flowing through us, wrapping our arms around one another, walking in the fullness of the Spirit to impact the culture of our world today. God bless you. Thanks for joining us.